Welcome to Parenting Decoded. I have with me Bianca D'Agostino. She is a therapist in Ottawa, Canada, who specializes in kids, teens, and families, and happens to have a lot of experience in dealing with anxiety. I've invited her on the show today to talk to us about anxiety in our kids. Welcome, Bianca.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary, for having me here. I'm really excited to do this podcast.
Hey, I wanted to start off the podcast with the basics, like what is anxiety? Can you describe it to us? Give us some hints about what it is?
So, yeah, that's a really great question. So, anxiety really is our natural response to stress or to a feared situation. And so everybody has this alarm system embedded within their brains in the amygdala. And so it's much like the kind of fight, flight, freeze response that you described in your previous podcast about tantrums. And so this little alarm system is really looking out for threats in our environment. And so this alarm system gets triggered when we have a perceived threat. And so that doesn't mean that there's kind of an actual physical threat in our environment, but the person is perceiving this threat and then they might feel anxious. And so there are a lot of different ways of how anxiety can actually manifest in different people. And what I usually explain to people is I'll explain something called the ABCs of anxiety. And so the ABCs of anxiety, they actually go all the way to F, so A, B, C, D, E, F. But it really helps people kind of remember the different signs and the different symptoms and different experiences that might come with anxiety. So A is for affect, and this really means changes in emotions or physical sensations. So for the kids that I work with, sometimes I can talk to parents for kind of looking out, if their child looks visibly distressed, do they look worried? Are they complaining of physical sensations, of stomach aches, of headaches, of a racing heart, of sweat, of feeling tense? So that's all kind of changes in affect that you can be aware of in terms of anxiety. B is for behavior. So this is changes in children's actual behavior. So are they avoiding the feared stimuli? If they have a birthday party that they were really excited to go to, or they're typically excited to go to birthday parties, and all of a sudden they're like, I don't really want to go. That would be kind of an avoidance behavior. Are they asking for reassurance a lot? Are they seeking out reassurance from different people? Those are all changes in behavior that might indicate anxiety. C stands for cognition. So that really just means the actual thoughts that people are having. So, if kids ever talk about, what if the house catches fire, or what if I fail this test, or what if they don't like me? Those are the actual kind of like cognitive thoughts that are happening. So D is for dependence. And this really means, is your child depending on you to ease their anxiety, or depending on others? Sometimes teenagers might depend on friends or significant others. And they might be depending on people for reassurance or for rescuing. And so when I say rescuing, it means kind of support in avoiding the feared stimuli. So that might be, okay, sweetheart, we don't need to go to the birthday party, no problem. And so are people reassuring the child or rescuing the child from kind of the anxious situations? E is for excessive and or extreme kind of thoughts or behaviors. So are these thoughts that they're having, or the behaviors that they're doing, whether it's avoiding, reassurance seeking, are they happening often? Are they happening repetitively? Is it excessive? Is the worry really extreme? So are they fearing something that's really unlikely to happen? So, what if a meteor lands on my house? Or what if I fail this test, even though this child may be kind of like an A student? So these things that are really unlikely. And F is for functioning. And so this is kind of the last of the ABCs of anxiety. And functioning really means, how does the worry, or how does the anxiousness or anxiety actually affect a child's functioning in their daily life? So this might be academic functioning. Are they starting to fail tests because of worry? Social functioning. Are they having trouble making friends? Are they avoiding specific social situations? This could be functioning in extracurricular activities, functioning within the family. So how does this affect their functioning?
Okay. Well, In kids especially, it seems like there's different categories of triggers that can send them. You mentioned academic already and some social ones. Are there other things that you can think of that kids really get sent to the moon with worry and anxiety that parents should look out for?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there are some that I can think of, kind of off the top of my head. So like we'd mentioned, academic, social news media is kind of a big one, especially in the past year. So a lot of kids have been coming with worries in relation to what they're seeing in the news media, and some worry about this is understandable. And again, we're going back to those kind of ABCs. Is it excessive? Is it affecting their functioning? Those kinds of things. And so that might look like, is life as we know it going to end? Am I safe? Is my family safe? And again, kind of like, is this repetitive? Is this affecting their functioning? Some other kind of themes of anxiety might be kind of flowing into that mortality and illness concerns. Again, another big one this year for sure with COVID-19. Lots and lots of kids. Am I going to get sick? Am I going to get my parents sick? Are my friends going to sick? Are people going to die? Is everyone going to die? And kind of mortality as well, right? So is a disaster about to happen? All those kinds of fears might fit into that kind of theme or category. And then finally, a big one that kind of fits into academic, but it can also fit into social, even like emotional functioning, is the fear of failure. So, specifically, fear of failure within my social group. Am I going to make a fool of myself? Fear of failure with whatever extracurricular activities I may be doing. If I'm a gymnast, I have this huge fear of failing or not meeting my expectations. Or academically, if I have these expectations for myself that I'm a B or an A student and I don't meet that expectation or I fail per se, that can cause a lot of anxiety. A lot of test anxiety as well is really common lately.
How about separation anxiety for little kids?
Yes, you're right. So separation anxiety is a huge one for little kids. So this really means, and like we'd said, it is definitely a subset of anxiety that's primarily occurring in kids, I'd say under 10 primarily. And it can start to manifest as like young as 3 or as young as 4 or even 2. And so separation anxiety really is when the child has a really hard time separating from either their attachment figure or from their kind of their safe people. So that might be mom or dad or their parents or their guardians or their caregivers. And this can affect their functioning, right? If they're not going to daycare, if they're not going to school, if they're not going to play with their friends because they kind of want to be right beside their parent, that is a huge one. You're right, for sure.
Well, one question that I get from parents is sometimes we as parents, we notice things and we wonder if we're going to make it worse by bringing it up. What's your feel about, are you going to make it worse by talking to your kids about it? Is there a safe way to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking to your kids about anxiety, it does not make the anxiety worse. It can actually be really, really helpful and foster a really supportive environment around that. So definitely we can speak some more about some strategies that parents can use to kind of start that conversation with their kids.
Okay, we'll talk about it in a little while. Would you comment right now on, I have parents with different age kids, and does anxiety, from your perspective, hit kids differently when they're young versus elementary versus high school or whatever? What do you see that's different in those age groups?
So generally, kind of with those ABCs, that stays consistent kind of throughout each age, but there are different, I guess, like subsets or themes of anxiety that might present in different age groups more often. So, for example, like we mentioned, separation anxiety. That one is really, really, really big in younger kids. So, you don't quite see it as much in teenagers or preteens, but really popular kind of with kids. I'd say 10 and under, even more so like 6 and under. There's also something called selective mutism that is also more so in kids that are, I'd say, also under 10, but more so 6 and under. So selective mutism is really where the child is selectively mute in different situations. So they have their safe person or their safe people, and they will speak to that person or those people. But outside of that, they will not speak. And so that might be, if they go to school, and no matter how kind of welcoming and how friendly the school environment is, for some reason their anxiousness is stopping them from being able to speak in that environment. Same thing with extracurricular activities. And these kids do want to speak. They want to be able to kind of have these relationships or these experiences, but the anxiety is stopping them.
Kind of
Um,
just makes them freeze,
yeah,
sounds like.
exactly. That's exactly it, right? So that response
Wow.
for sure. So another one in terms of kind of, this might go into separation, but going to school. So these kind of big life transitions can be really scary for younger kids, particularly because they just don't have that experience or that amount of experiences that older kids do about big life transitions. So going to school, or maybe, traveling for the first time, going on a plane, like those kinds of things are more common in younger kids, particularly just because they're still kind of learning about the world around them and understanding what's what. Now, in older kids, you start to kind of get, when they get a sense of who they are and they gain a sense of how they see the world and how others might see them, you start to see more social anxiety, fear of being judged, fear of being made fun of, wanting to come off a certain way. There's academic anxiety, right? I want to do well. I want to be the top of my class, or I want to meet the expectations that I have for myself. Some kids get to a test and they're so anxious that they freeze and they cannot access the information that they had been studying and studying and studying for. Another kind of big one, I'd say with older kids that I see a little bit more often, is worrying about the future. So worrying about either the future like next year or the future in 5 years from now. I even get some kids talking about I don't know what I'm going to do for college or university. And those kinds of bigger thoughts start happening when kids get a little bit older.
Mhm. And so it does look a little different depending on the
Yeah.
age of your kid.
Yeah.
And yet they all it's all anxiety, and they can all lead to our kids not being able to move ahead
Hmm.
in healthy ways.
Hmm.
All right, Bianca, now that we talked a little bit about what is anxiety, how it might look with our kids, can we move on to what can a parent do? And I know when we were prepping for this podcast, you and I were talking about there's short-term strategies that you can do in the moment and then some longer-term ones. Talk to us about some of the short-term strategies. We see our kids struggling right in front of our face. You're in the middle of some social situation or whatever. What can we do to help them right then?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll preface this with saying that if there's ever a time where you're not sure of what to do, definitely seek mental health support from a professional in your area. Now, with that being said, here are some strategies that you could try. You can try when your child is really dysregulated or really overwhelmed. Um, so the first step I would say is making sure that as a parent, you are calm, because when kids are dysregulated, it can be really dysregulating for parents, and we can kind of get triggered, right? And so
Yeah,
we want to make sure that we're calm so we could be the safe place for our kids. So
for
that
sure.
might require, taking a step away, potentially taking a deep breath, wait until you're ready to kind of like face the situation with your child.
So if
So
you're upset, don't try to address the kids stuff until you
yeah.
get yourself in line.
Yeah, yeah. You want to be that kind of like safe spot to land, I guess, for your child. And so if you are like rigid and upset and angry, you might risk kind of potentially minimizing their problems or dismissing them, or maybe not making them feel as heard as you could when you're coming at it from a place of calm and from a place of, I'm here to support you and I'm okay with this kind of thing. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So I'd say step two, once you're calm, once you're ready to kind of be like, right, you're having a hard time right now. I'm here for you. Definitely provide some empathy. And so what that looks like is, I'm sorry you're having such a hard time. This sounds so tough. Having that worry would be stressful. I can understand that. And so if you're validating the feeling, it doesn't mean that you're validating the behavior that might be happening or the worry, but if you're validating the feeling, that will kind of help them be like, okay, yeah, my parent gets it, or my parent is kind of understanding what's going on.
Yeah, they
Uh,
hear me.
yeah, they hear me. And this provides that co regulation piece. So, co regulation, um, it's kind of a process of where you are helping your child re-regulate. And so like we spoke about earlier, when that alarm system is going off, they're maybe in fight, flight, or freeze mode. It's like survival mode. They're super, super stressed. And kids, especially, they don't have, or their frontal cortex is not fully developed yet. And so the frontal cortex is kind of that smart part of the brain that can help with re-regulation and can help with calming down and can help with thinking more clearly. So it's important for parents to help co-regulate their kids until they can build the skills to do that on their own. So for a lot of younger kids, it's really, really, really difficult to do this. So coming at it from empathy, validation can help with that co-regulation piece. And then there's also some kind of like mindfulness.
So what so wait, so co-regulation means that you try to get your kid to be acting like you, like, "I'm calm." That is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah. So it's almost like a mirroring effect, kind of. So if you like, for example, if you were to come to the situation really angry and really stressed, that actually might have them amp up their stress and potentially their anger, right?
Right.
And so if you're coming at it with a sense of calm and you're helping them, and this might be if they like to be hugged or physically, if they like physical sensations, this actually can help kind of like calm the nervous system. If their heart was beating really fast because they were nervous or scared or anxious, this might help slow the heart rate. And parents can also practice some breathing techniques or some mindfulness techniques with their child or even in front of their child. Sometimes
So
we
do
have
it with them.
yeah, yep,
Okay.
exactly. Exactly. And sometimes parents can start, and sometimes kids aren't ready to kind of participate in that yet. Maybe they're not all the way regulated, but modeling it is super, super helpful. Even if, on one instance, they don't particularly start to practice those strategies, but the more you're consistent with it, the more they'll be like, okay, let me give it a try now.
Okay.
Um, so, in terms of the breathing, deep breaths, super, super important. Deep belly breaths, particularly. And there's also something that I use with kids and families. It's called square breathing. And this one's kind of fun for the kids because I sometimes have them draw their own square with their own colors. So basically, what square breathing is, you either draw out a square or you have the child draw out a square, depending kind of where they're at developmentally. And on the square, there's four sides. So on the top side of the square, you're going to write in. On one of the sides of the square, you're going to write hold. On the bottom of the square, you're going to write out. And on the other side of the square, you're going to write nothing. And so you explain to the child that on the in breath, you breathe in. When you go down, you hold. On the side, you are breathing out. And then on this side, there's absolutely nothing in your belly or in your lungs, depending on how you're explaining it. And again, this can help slow the heart rate down. And it's kind of nice because I have them trace the square. If you have a piece of paper handy, sometimes I even look at a window and I say, trace the window. And you can make the breaths as long or as short as you'd like. Sometimes it's really great because not only are they kind of using something with their hands or they're able to kind of like fidget or focus on their finger moving, but they're also practicing those deep breaths.
Hmm. And can you encourage them? I know I do yoga, and we start out in a certain breath sequence that's like 4-second breaths on each of those
Yeah.
squares, and then we go to 5, and we try to get it to 8, at least one of the
Yeah.
classes that I was in recently. Would that be something that you'd wanna encourage parents to be able to, over time, maybe be able to get their kids to just do it longer, not necessarily 4 or 8 or whatever, but something
Yeah.
that works for their kid?
Yeah,
Oh,
for
that
sure.
that would be so nice. Now, what about, I know that some parents that I've talked to do use apps on a phone,
Hmm.
like Headspace and, Calm and apps
Yeah.
like that. What do you think? Is it
Those
something
are
that you
Yeah, those are really great resources. So that's a really good point. Those apps are awesome. I particularly have used Headspace and Calm myself,
Oh,
and they're really, really great for parents if they need to re-regulate, for kids, for teens. um, yeah, they're awesome, and they're really great because they're handy. They're on you, and they sometimes prompt you. So sometimes they prompt, how are you feeling today, or you can kind of like organize different mindfulness activities or different breath work activities. So they're really great apps to have handy.
mhm.
And I, from kind of anecdotally, what I've heard, that they're helpful.
Well, I don't know if it was you that also told me one that's meant for kids. It's called Stop, Breathe, and Think Kids. Does that sound familiar?
I
The intention is for a mindfulness breathing and stuff, calming
Right.
for on an app, but meant for kids as opposed to I know that Headspace and Calm, they tend to be more focused towards adults, but there
Yeah,
are some options in either any of those that are meant for kids, I would think, some of them, but I know that that one is. That's what did I just say? It was Stop, Breathe, and Think Kids. I'll put it in the, show notes too so that parents could get to those resources. Well,
perfect.
what about longer term options? Talked about, like, in the
Yeah,
moment, that was what we were just talking about,
mhm,
mindfulness, co-regulation, making sure you yourself are calm in dealing with it, give it lots of empathy. And, what about the long term? What could you do in the long term if you notice that your kid is really, struggling with anxiety? What sort of things are available?
yeah,
What do
yeah.
you do?
So long term, I would definitely. So there's a couple things that I'm going to say. First of all, long term, if you're noticing that your child is struggling, again, see in your area if there's any professionals that might be of help, or finding kind of a professional that fits for you. Now, as a parent, maybe while your child is getting services, or even just like in the long term, it's really, really important to kind of evaluate if you are accommodating the anxiety. And what I mean by that is, earlier when I mentioned kind of that avoidance behavior or reassurance seeking. So providing reassurance, or when your child asks you for reassurance, and you could say, no, it's okay, or no, don't worry about it. It can feel helpful in the moment, but it actually might be, there's multiple things that it might be doing. It might be dismissing their worry. So if it's kind of like, no, don't worry about it, your child might be like, but I am worrying about it. So what does that mean for me? They might not feel heard about that. And
And
providing, oh,
and
sorry, go ahead.
that might cause more anxiety. I know
Yeah.
one of the, people on my Parenting Decoded, Facebook group was explaining to me that as a child, when she was in her teens and she hit anxiety, and she tried to explain it to her parents, and her parents just they never listened.
Hmm.
And so as an adult, she's had to seek therapy for herself and everything, and it was just sad that,
Yeah.
sometimes it is us as parents that are accidentally, not necessarily on purpose, not
Yep.
taking it seriously enough,
Hmm.
to be able to be helped, we kinda can mess things up more ourselves. So anyway, keep going.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really great point. And that's exactly it, right? It's like we don't feel heard, and parents are accidentally, right? Like you said, not on purpose, but it might be easier in the moment to kind of say like, don't worry about it. Or if you're providing reassurance and saying, no, it's fine, everything's fine. Again, it might be dismissing the worry, but it also might be kind of inadvertently having that child become dependent on reassurance. So then it becomes kind of this cycle. So it feels good to give reassurance in the moment, but it actually might not be helpful for anxiety in the long term.
Yeah, I've had parents say that their kid just won't stop asking them, "Is this okay? Is this okay?" They're
Yeah.
just constantly asking for reassurance and attention in ways that their other children might not be.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Another kind of accommodation I would look out for is if you are rescuing your child. And so I don't mean like literally rescuing, but in the sense of, if I go back to that birthday party example, if they're like, no, I really don't want to go to the birthday party. And maybe they've shared with you what the worry is. And maybe it's like, oh, I'm scared that no one will want to play with me. That's something that you can empathize. Again, don't say, don't worry about it. It's okay. You can say, oh, that must be scary. That must be worrisome. And then you can help them feel supported, right? Like, I'll be here with you, or let's go and see. If it's going to be something where you think will really, really stress your child out, it's okay to kind of avoid that situation for the moment. And that might be kind of when you're like, okay, let's get professional help on this. But if you notice that you're rescuing your child from those kind of stressful or maybe anxiety inducing situations, it might be cool to evaluate why you are rescuing them or what that's kind of evoking in you as a parent. Because sometimes it's hard to see kids like, I don't want my kid to be stressed out, or I don't want them to feel sad or worried or anything like that.
Mhm.
Again, it might be inadvertently kind of like making them
Triggering.
rely. Yeah, triggering for sure, triggering more anxiety because they're like, oh, I can't handle this on my own. I can't do it. So I need to
You know,
avoid it.
it's so funny that you mentioned this because what comes to mind is all the helicopter parents that at least I have that I work with in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
We're all just trying to be helpful, and we keep rescuing all
Yeah.
the time. I mean, that was my main thing when my kids were little. I wanted to be the best helicopter parent possible, not realizing that I was doing it,
Yeah.
and not letting my kids face failure because like, "Oh, this test is really hard.
Hmm.
I'll help you study extra hard," and I do things to it's like, "Oh, you forgot your lunch," like, "I'll take care of that.
Yeah.
I'll run to school," and, that it wasn't necessarily stuff that was sending my kids into severe anxiety or anything,
Yeah.
but it's just little ways that over time, if
Hmm.
we do too much of it, can actually damage our kids' ability to keep growing.
Yeah,
And,
and that's really interesting that you mentioned kind of failure. And so that's really helpful again to kind of notice for parents long term if that's something that they might be doing is kind of protecting their kids from failure, which again might come naturally. Like, I don't want my child to fail. I want my child to do well. It's all well intentioned. But it again might be inadvertently actually potentially causing them to have something called a fixed mindset. So there's this idea called a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And so a fixed mindset really kind of identifies that people are born with fixed abilities. So that might look like, wow, you were born a hockey player, or you are a mathematician, or even just kind of like stating compliments that are fixed. You are good at math, that kind of thing. And so we grow up and we kind of like take those fixed abilities and we apply them to ourselves. We apply them to our self identity. And then if at any point, we get to a math problem, maybe we're at a new unit and we get to a math problem and we're not understanding it very well, maybe we get a bad mark on a math test, it completely affects our identity of, but I was supposed to be the one who was good at math.
right.
Um,
Or if somebody beats you on the math competition or is a
yeah.
better hockey player than you are, like,
Yep.
"What happened?"
Exactly, exactly. And this is where kind of this fear of failure comes in of like if I fail, then that means I'm not what I thought I was. Right? It's like that I'm not the math person or I'm not that hockey player. And same with making mistakes. There's a fear of making mistakes kind of with this fixed mindset as well. So on the other hand, growth mindset is this idea that abilities are not fixed. So maybe some people are born with, different abilities. Maybe some people are naturally kind of better at something as compared to somebody else. But that doesn't mean that that needs to remain fixed. So, really, growth mindset focuses on, and how I explain it to kids is growing your brain. And so that's like, oh, if I'm not really great at math right now, that doesn't mean I'm bad at math. It just means I need to learn different ways of how to practice math, or I need to learn different ways of how to solve this problem. Or if I'm not a great skater right now, that doesn't mean I'm always going to be a not great skater or a bad skater. It just means I need to practice and make mistakes and learn. And this also kind of goes into kind of like brain connection. So the more we learn and the more we make mistakes in different areas, those brain connections in those areas actually grow. And that's how we can kind of grow our abilities. So in this growth mindset idea, the kind of self concept is that if I am not getting something right away, that's okay because I can keep working at it. And it flips the perspective on mistakes as well. Mistakes are actually a good thing because that means my brain is growing, I'm learning, I'm having new connections in my brain. And so for parents, it can be really helpful to try and foster a growth mindset as compared to a fixed mindset. And a lot of people, again, kind of without noticing, might be kind of like stating compliments or supporting their child with fixed mindset um, phrases. Again, you're so great at math. You're so smart. You were born a hockey player, or you're a natural.
Or you're so pretty,
You're so
or you're
pretty.
so fast, or
Yeah, yeah, these are all fixed traits, right? And again, if something changes in those fixed traits, like maybe we find someone that we think is prettier than us, or someone's faster than us, or we fall in a race, and then it's like, oh, I'm not good at this anymore. That can be really, really detrimental for that. Again, that self concept, and also the ability to kind of like persevere through like making mistakes and coming over hurdles. Where with a growth mindset, parents can really focus on the process and not the outcome. So that might be like, wow, you're working so hard on that. That's awesome. Good for you. Or, wow, I saw that you practiced that so much. That's so great that you keep trying. Or, you know what, you made a mistake and that's cool. That means our brain is growing. So those kinds of phrases can help foster that growth mindset.
yeah, I was rereading Carol Dweck's book called Mindset that was, kind of paved the way for this whole conversation, and it's so fun to listen and read the, book again because she talks about with kids how their brains can move from a fixed mindset into a growth mindset, especially if their natural abilities, let's say I have a friend whose son is a great athlete, and he was falling apart a bit because
Mm,
athletics baseball was getting harder and harder,
yeah.
and, with a fixed mindset, that kid falls apart and will stop playing baseball. Because
Yeah.
because in their minds, they couldn't improve enough, whereas, his friends continued on in baseball because they were willing to practice and put in more hours and stuff like that. I'm in the Bay Area, so the Warriors basketball team is our local team, and Steph Curry is known for he keeps getting stronger and he practices harder. Michael Jordan,
Mm,
practicing harder and longer than anybody else because they were already fabulous. But they knew that they could improve and they would put in the work to improve and things
mhm.
like that. And kids who have that fixed mindset, they just break. And some of them
Yeah.
might stop doing let's say they were a great violinist as a kid, a quote unquote great violinist, showing promise, and they'll like when things get too hard and they don't wind up in first chair violin in high school, they'll just give up.
Yeah.
And it's so sad that instead, like, wow, what a great opportunity that you have. And
Mhm.
if you can be honest with your kid about what they're struggling with, they said in the book to not beat around the bush. Like if your kid really isn't doing well at violin, just like, wow, that's really interesting that you're not doing that well. What do you think you could do to do better? As opposed
Yeah.
to, and if they really want to give up, it's okay as long as it's
Mhm.
their choice and they're doing it
Yeah.
full mindedly or something, if that's a word. So
Yeah.
I just love I mean, you and I had talked about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I love it. If I could get all the parents to encourage their kids to have a growth mindset, it would really help,
Yeah.
especially when they get to be older and the all the social media
Yeah.
pressures and the anxiety that it creates,
Mhm.
where I'm gonna pick on girls, feel that they have to have the best Instagram and the best, selfies and stuff like that, and, it's okay for your child to want to be prettier or whatever, but it's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I noticed that that color looks you're using different colors on your clothes," or, "I
Yeah.
noticed that you dyed your hair differently," kinda like where we notice instead of saying like, "Oh, you're so pretty," because that's
Yeah.
so fixed mindset, and
Yeah.
so they wanna have that title of pretty instead of like, "Oh, I noticed you used to do blush," or something like that,
Yeah.
or a boy might have, changed the part of his hair, or they're trying out a man bun or something, it's like instead of having these fixed set mindsets or math or
Yeah.
English or whatever, it's just so great if we parents could give credit for their effort. That they're
Yes. Yeah.
trying.
So
I noticed
important.
that you're trying, that you really got over something and that you get to grow your brain. I have, a friend who's a second grade teacher, and when the kids in her class stumble and get aren't doing well on a particular concept, she'll say, "Well, we all get to grow our brains today." And she will use that mindset phraseology in her
That's
classroom
awesome.
just to remind them that the brain is a muscle and it needs to be
Mhm.
exercised just like our legs. And so you can use it with really young kids. I just love it.
Yes.
So
That's
we're on the same
awesome.
page. All right. Well, so far we've been talking a lot about anxiety in general, but I wanted us to touch on what happens when it kind of crosses over into more serious anxiety issues where it's impacting daily life. Can you walk us through how that looks?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So generally, I typically say, it doesn't need to be something really intense or something really, it doesn't need to impact your functioning a lot. If you wanted to seek therapy, like I always tell people, therapy is great, whether you have mild, moderate, severe kind of symptoms or anxieties. Um, but there are some kind of important things to look out for when maybe your child might need some extra help if you haven't already thought about it before. So again, if we go back to that F in the ABCDEFs of anxiety, looking at functioning. So is there anxiousness or worry or feelings of anxiety? um, is it affecting their social life? Is it affecting their academic life? Is it affecting their home life? Are they not able to do the things that they normally would have done before? Like if you're noticing this change, and how is it affecting? Is it affecting kind of like one context? Is it, school related? Is it affecting social context? Is it affecting everything? And there are definitely kind of some things to look out for that might mean a different kind of I guess a different kind of anxiety or a different kind of subset of anxiety under the anxiety umbrella, per se. So there is something called obsessive compulsive disorder, and what that is characterized by is a little bit different than kind of the ABCs. They do fit into the ABCs, but it might kind of present itself a little bit differently. And so what I mean by that is really there's pieces of obsessions and pieces of compulsions. Now there are kind of some subcategories that are just kind of the obsession piece, but that might look like um, I'm going to get COVID. I'm going to get COVID if I touch this door handle, if I go outside, if I don't turn on the lights 3 times, I'm going to get COVID. So it's this just like this repetitive, unwanted thought that is usually followed by some sort of repetitive compulsion. So that might be like washing your hands multiple times or in a specific manner. That might be walking back and forth a certain amount of times. It might be turning off and on the light switch a certain amount of times. So it really is kind of characterized by these obsessions and these compulsions, which might mean it's this different category of anxiousness or this different category of anxiety that would definitely kind of be helpful with or to get some outside help or some professional help to kind of help manage that for your child. There's also kind of another subset of anxiety called phobias. And so there's many, many different types of phobias. They fall into some different categories. So there could be, like phobias of needles or phobias of animals, phobias of heights, many different phobias. And this is more than just a fear of something. So I know we talked about earlier of, young kids might be fearful of new experiences, like going on an airplane because they don't know what to expect. So they might have a little bit of worry around that. This is different. It's really, it evokes such a response with their alarm system that they might like immediately, even just thinking about it, might go into a fight, flight, freeze response. So with some of the kids I worked with, even just thinking about the feared stimuli would evoke that anxiety response. Like their heart would start to beat. Some kids might start to cry. So it's really, really difficult to try and manage that. So again, that's something that you would want for sure to seek outside help.
So is
And like,
that stuff like I know kids that are really scared of dogs, or they're scared. I still know adults that are scared of spiders or whatever. Like,
mhm.
how do you know when it's really severe? Because like I've known plenty of adults that are scared of spiders, but it's not controlling their lives
Yeah, yeah, and
necessarily.
That's a really good distinction. Is I myself am definitely, I do not like spiders. I am definitely like, if it's in the room, I need someone to kill it for me kind of thing. And so it really does depend, kind of like if you seek someone who does an assessment to kind of really see if it would be categorized as a phobia or just something that we're really scared of. But like we discussed, like if it goes into that functioning piece, like some people are, maybe if they have a phobia of needles, they don't go into pharmacies or they don't go into doctor's offices or they don't go. So that's affecting their functioning, that's affecting their daily life.
Or if they were afraid of
Um,
dogs, they might not go to a park because there's a dog there.
yeah,
There are dogs there.
yes,
Even though they like
exactly.
the park and they wanna play in the park, they might
Yeah,
avoid the whole park. And that's where
yeah,
we as parents can kind of feed into that too. It's like, "Oh my gosh, can't go to that park because it has a dog." Um,
yeah,
but I would if my kid was that way, there might be a reason to have a therapist help with that. And there could be
yeah,
before, you and I were talking offline about, sometimes the anxiety is caused by trauma. So if they had
yeah,
been bitten by a dog when they were little,
yes,
maybe that explains it, but if they never have been and, then there might be a reason to do that. So, okay.
yeah. And it's really important to remember that it doesn't, you don't have to see every single one of those A, B, C, D, E, Fs from your child before wanting to seek help. So, like I mentioned earlier, if there's anything that you would like to make easier or anything that you're concerned about, and you're kind of like, I just don't really know where to start or what it is, definitely kind of reach out to a professional in your area and they can help like tease through some of that confusion. They can help provide some more strategies. And it doesn't have to be forever. Like sometimes these things, if it's really specific, sometimes therapy can be, 12 sessions or under, 10 sessions or under. And sometimes therapy is more long term. And it really depends on many, many factors. But just because you seek therapy kind of once doesn't mean you're going to be, or your child is going to be in therapy forever, kind of thing.
Mhm. Well, one question that parents have in their minds, I think, when you look at a therapist is, especially if you haven't used one yourself, is, what could therapy look like for kids? Like little kids
Yeah.
versus teens? I mean, I'm in my mind, I think of more teens being closer to adult kind of therapies. Like, what is there
Yeah.
that's useful for kids that we can seek out maybe?
Yeah. So I'd say for younger kids, I mean, well, there's a number of different modalities that different therapists work with. Some therapists are more trauma informed, and it's really dependent on kind of like what we're used to using and what we're trained in. But for younger kids, play therapy can be super super helpful, especially kids who might have trouble like verbalizing their thoughts or verbalizing their feelings, which a lot of kids do, especially when they're younger. Um, and what play therapy can do is actually kind of facilitate these kinds of conversations through play. So, conversations with two different characters or two different dolls or anything like that might look like one doll that the child is using is acting out this feared situation. And then that kind of gives therapists a little bit more information and insight into how they might be feeling. And then there's also different techniques of how to kind of like overcome these fears through play. So it's a really, really great resource for younger kids or kids who might be interested in play, who might have again difficulties verbalizing what's going on in their head.
Right, right. And then we were talking also about a couple of different things for dealing with anxieties that might be specifically used in the therapy sessions. The CBT and the decatastrophizing stuff. Go on to comment on that, what that might look like.
Yeah, so CBT is something that I use a lot with
Oh,
my older kids.
tell what it is.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So CBT, so CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and what this really focuses on is the link between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Or I would say thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and behaviors. And so this is something that I use a lot in my practice. So I'll give you an example of sometimes how I explain CBT and how thoughts and feelings and behaviors can kind of have this bi-directional relationship and affect one another. So, for example, if I'm someone who really is really scared of dogs. Like maybe I was bit by a dog when I was younger. For some reason, I just really don't like dogs. They're scary to me. They just mean danger. So if I'm walking across the street, maybe I'm walking down the sidewalk and I see a dog, my initial thought is going to be, oh my gosh, a dog, it's going to bite me, or scary, or danger. So that might lead me to feel scared or stressed, or maybe I have these sensations like my heart is beating fast, or maybe I freeze when I'm really scared. And then my behavior will depend on kind of that process, right? So, like I said, I might freeze. Maybe I cross the street because I don't want to be near the dog, or I just like look away. There's different things that might affect that original, or might be affected by that original thought. So, on the flip side, if I really love dogs and I'm in the exact same situation, same street, same sidewalk, and I really love dogs, and I see a dog walking on down the sidewalk, I might think, my thought might be, oh my gosh, a dog. You're so cute. I love dogs. So it makes me feel happy. So I might feel happy or warm or giddy, if I want to go pet the dog. And the behavior might be, oh, I'm going to ask to pet the dog, or I'm going to stare at it as I walk by, or I'm not going to move across the street. And so really CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, focuses on this relationship between thoughts, feelings and sensations and behaviors for different kinds of situations. And it can kind of explore, like if you have one situation, how can they differ based on that process of our thoughts, our feelings and sensations, and our behavior. And so for anxiety, when you had mentioned kind of that decatastrophizing, so this is something that it's kind of like one of the strategies that can be used in cognitive behavioral therapy. And it really focuses on kind of the title kind of alludes to what it means, but catastrophizing means thinking the worst case scenario. Like this, if, for example, if I'm someone who's about to take a test and I'm worried about failing that test, and then I think about failing the course, and then I think about having to redo the grade, and then I think about maybe my grades aren't good to get into university or college. And that's me catastrophizing. Like I'm thinking of the absolute string of worst case scenarios. And one thing to do called decatastrophizing, or even just kind of like flipping the perspective on that, or flipping how we view that, is analyzing, is this scenario really likely? Like, and then sometimes with kids, I can actually calculate the likelihood, like using numbers. Sometimes we do that and it ends up being like 0.01 or 0.001% chance that this would actually happen once we get to the college piece. But what you want to do is almost like challenge that worry, or that worst case scenario, and see if you can find like a neutral thought for that. So if it's like, oh, what if I fail my test? It might be like, okay, so what would happen if you fail your test? Oh, well, then I would get this grade. Okay, like what's the likely thing that would happen if you got that grade? And eventually, it's not going to be very likely that you don't get into college, or that you have to like retake the whole course based on this one test kind of thing. So it can also, again, you're kind of like challenging that worst case scenario, because usually they're very, very, very unlikely.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about the case of a dog? Like I'm walking at the park and I think the dog's going to bite me. That's my worst case scenario. It's like here I am with my mom and dad and I'm playing, and a dog comes along and it's like, oh my God, I have to leave the park because that dog's going to bite me and hurt me really bad. How do you decatastrophize that, or use CBT to do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So again, I'd want to know if it's like a phobia of dogs. Are we just scared of dogs? Because I wouldn't want to put a child in a situation that would really, really distress them without them being prepared for that. But something else that we can do, kind of like with these feared situations, is use something called exposure. So what that looks like is, again, if it's dogs, we'll go with like, I'm scared of going to the park because there's a dog, or I see a dog and I don't want to be near it at the park. So that's the feared stimuli, is dog. And first, what therapists will do is they'll get a sense of like, how feared is this stimuli on a kind of scale from like 1 to 10 of anxiety. Like when you think about dogs or being near a dog, where are you on this scale? And that will give us a good sense of where to start. Because again, we wouldn't want to, if it's 10 and we just say, great, go to the park and just be near the dog, that's going to be so distressing for them. And it'll actually kind of like not do what we want it to do. It will almost be like
backfire.
counteract. Yeah, it'll backfire for
Yeah,
sure.
right.
So exposure, and this is something that therapists do. They, with the child or with the teen, will kind of create a hierarchy almost. Sometimes it's like pictures of ladders, like you're climbing a literal ladder. For kids, I have a picture of ladders. And each step of the ladder, you're doing one thing, like you're going one step closer to that feared stimuli, but you're making it in such a way that it's not distressing and it's not kind of alerting that alarm system response. So they're not going into fight, flight, or freeze mode, but they're safely and securely with their parents or with their therapist going through each step until they're kind of like desensitized to it. So let's just say the dog in the park situation. So maybe even when like the child thinks about a dog, they get that response, right? So then it might be kind of
Look
like,
at
okay,
pictures of dogs or something.
yeah, it might be think about dogs, look at pictures of dogs until that's not scary anymore. And then it might be let's watch a video of a dog. And then it kind of like, okay, let's just look at the park. Let's just visit the park and then leave until that's not scary anymore. So that's something that therapists can create kind of like with the child or with their families, depending on the age. And again, it's really important to make sure that you're not jumping steps. So you're not kind of going into this alarm
Mhm.
system response.
And then the therapist can gently work with your child to try to figure out those anxieties and help come up with strategies to desensitize them to them or help get them over it. But I have some families who ask me, Mary, who tell me, Mary, my kid won't go to a therapist. What do you say
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it would be really important to come at this. I'm going to use problem, but it's not a problem. I guess this sticky spot um, from a lens of curiosity. So there's so many reasons why kids uh, might not want to go see a therapist. There's lots of different reasons for younger kids. There's lots of different reasons for teens or kind of like tweens. So kind of coming at it from a lens of curiosity and not from a lens of like, hey, you need to do this. Why aren't you doing this? But from a lens of like, hey, I noticed that you seem uncomfortable about this, or you kind of seem like unsure. Can we talk about it? I want to be able to understand. I want to be able to understand you better. Um, so from that kind of like lens of curiosity might facilitate this conversation of why they don't want to go. Maybe they had a bad experience in therapy before, or maybe if it's their first time, they're worried about it. Maybe they're catastrophizing. Like maybe they're having like all these thoughts of this person. Some people, sometimes think that therapists are very sterile, I guess, or just like very like not fun and not and sometimes kids are scared about that, and so sometimes it takes either like looking at videos of therapists or talking about it or validating the worries and making a plan for that to help them feel understood and supported. So I would say first things first, kind of come at it from a lens of curiosity, and then whatever they provide you, you can kind of like move forward with in conversation and help them feel supported.
Yeah, and I think maybe nowadays with more telehealth available, one of the
Yeah.
options might be let's do a Zoom call with a therapist. And the other
Yeah.
thing that's really interesting that I've learned over time is that there are many different types of therapists and many different personalities, and
Hmm.
sometimes what we've learned from one therapist or dealt with one therapist has left a bad taste in our mouth, but there's so many
Hmm.
other therapists, and that you need to find one that clicks with you, and the same is true with our
Yes.
kids, is that
Hmm.
sometimes the kid is gonna absolutely love that, like, if they're little, I would certainly head towards, like, play therapy and stuff like that. I think that's
Yeah.
a great option that isn't talked about very much because I don't think that many little kids go to therapists, but it's a
Hmm.
really fun option that can, bring some joy into your kid as they're exploring these feelings, and then, just as kids get older and they become more reluctant, like, "I don't want to," it's like, "Well, let's try. Let's just
Yeah.
try. What's the harm in trying?" And I do know teens that just will refuse,
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
there's unfortunately empathy for the parents that we can offer, I guess, and
Yeah.
the other thing is for the parent to seek therapy as well
Yes.
in order to deal with
Yeah.
that, because
Yeah.
sometimes it's really disappointing and frustrating, and there's other issues going on too, so
Yeah, for sure. That's a really great point. Yeah, so if the child's kind of refusing, parents seeking therapy, you can speak about, again, kind of like their own feelings about that, and also talk about strategies that might help with supporting their child, even if their child's not actually kind of seeking the service.
yeah.
But you're right, there's so many different modalities of therapy. There's so many different therapists. So sometimes you're going to meet a therapist and maybe you don't click, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're not right for therapy, or it doesn't mean the therapist is bad. It just means that sometimes people click more than other people, and that's totally fine. And it's really important to find someone who you click with, so then you feel comfortable kind of sharing and working together.
Yeah. Well, I know that, there's also this reluctance where, let's say if I go to a therapist and I have 4 sessions with them, there's this bond that I don't like the therapist, but I feel like I'm gonna offend them if they don't keep going back. So I just
Right.
stop instead of like most therapists are actually used to people saying, "It's not our relationship isn't working, I'm gonna go somewhere else." And they're fine with that. And
Yeah,
that's
that's
kinda
exactly it.
surprising. It's like, I wanna free parents, like, if there's a therapist that you're working with that you don't like, go find someone else, because there is somebody
Yes.
else, and there's somebody better for you. That doesn't imply that that therapist is a bad therapist in any way,
Yep.
and therapists are totally supportive of that. It's like, find somebody that
Yep.
works with you, that works for you, and that you bond with,
Yeah.
because it can be so nurturing, if we
Yeah.
find the right people in our lives to help us out. Well,
Yeah, for
Bianca,
sure.
thank you so much for being on my show. I really appreciate all the insights into anxieties, and I hope this is helpful to whomever listens to it. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I really appreciate you kind of like asking me to join tonight. And I love talking about anxiety. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye.